Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Seems there's some trouble over at the Peacock channel. The open-minded East Coast liberals are showing their true colors again, and the Arabs are finding themselves on the outs. And what I'm talking about isn't going on in the Middle East, it's going on in the white media. Now, is this about race or religion? Well, consider this. Arabs, by and large, identify as white. Steve Jobs was of Syrian descent. He was adopted by a family with the surname Jobs. Casey Kasem was another one. One of the most famous DC-based reporters was Helen Thomas, who, despite her last name, was an Arab. You have people who, when they immigrate to the U.S., regardless of any talk about them being olive-skinned or whatever, they personally identify as white. This goes for Hispanics as well as Arabs. About the only time there's any breaks in this facade is whenever the white supremacists start bringing these folks in for some abuse. Then all of a sudden they remember that, well, I'm not white right now, at least I don't feel that way. From time to time they get a reminder that the dominant society is just playing along with them but reserves the right to stop at any moment. See 9/11. But for the most part, when it comes to business and society, that's who they most openly identify with. Whenever I see certain stories in the news, I can't help but think of Dean Obadala. He was a comedian, but as he himself put it, he went to bed a white guy and woke up an Arab after 9/11. Dean Obadiah, apparently with no self-awareness, never realized that he didn't have to wait until 9/11 to know that he was an Arab. Were white Americans more charitable toward Arabs when the oil embargo went down in the 70s? Or the Iran hostage crisis in 79, or the bombing of the Marine barracks in Lebanon in 83, or the numerous plane hijackings in the 1980s and the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 in 88, or the first Gulf War in 1991, or the first bombing of the World Trade Towers in 1993, or the bombing of the embassy in Kenya and Tanzania. Obadiah seems to think that America was just in love with Arabs and Muslims until 9/11. When the truth is that there's always been the slurs and insults and stereotypes. And Obadiah's not a child. He was born in 1969. He's older than I am. So he knows full well how things were in the 70s and 80s and 90s. So how did he forget about that? It's not that he forgot. It's that he had the luxury of pretending that he didn't know, because after all, you get that pat on the head and that's all that matters, right? Now, with the latest outbreak of war in the Middle East, there's a lot of people doing the most to try to get black people to try to choose sides. The reason for that is we are the only oppressed people on the entire planet. Everybody else is inconvenienced. That's why whenever every other group on the planet tries to talk about their alleged plight, they always come back to us. They always reference us because they know who's really oppressed and who's not. So since there's no substitute for the moral legitimacy that we represent, and there's also no getting around the fact that we alone are oppressed, everybody tries to see if they can get us to co-sign with what they're saying. We made a superpower have to, at least on paper, say that it was going to change its ways and admit to the world that it wasn't living up to its empty talk about democracy, freedom, and altruism. We are the moral compass of this country. No other group has done that, not even among black people in the diaspora. So we are truly unique. Ours is a pure struggle. And everyone wants to try to appropriate it for their own personal benefit. Well, we're not signing on to anything, because everybody who's trying to get us to lend our good offices to their problems, in many cases they are beneficiaries, if not outright participants, in our oppression. And that's just a fact. Both Jews and Arabs came to the U.S. as immigrants. Both of them lived in black communities when they got here, and it was our money that bootstrapped both of their businesses. And both of these groups turned around and engaged in the same anti-black racism as the rest of the society. Both groups used America's favorite rationales to justify the anti-black racism too. In many cases, they come from countries and cultures that were already practicing anti-black racism before they got here. And for a while, some of them thought that the dominant society would play along with their fiction, and they did, until it no longer amused them to do so. And when the truth inevitably comes out, it traumatizes the people who were holding certain illusions. Recently, Jonathan Greenblatt, the professional influence peddler, apparently didn't think that the Muslim anchors at MSNBC were towing the line for Israel strong enough. Even though none of those Muslim anchors were speaking against Israel, Greenblatt didn't think that they were cheerleading against the Palestinians enough. So he went on air and complained about it, and now we see that MSNBC's three most prominent Muslim anchors have been sidelined for the last several days. This, by the way, is how Jonathan Greenblatt operates. He demands that everyone do what he says and condemns whatever he orders people to condemn, and if he thinks you're not doing it, or in the case of MSNBC's Muslim anchors, if he thinks you're not doing it enthusiastically enough, then he'll drop some not-so-subtle hints that you're an anti-Semite, or at the very least, you're probably sympathetic to people who are anti-Semitic. And then the networks whose management are very much on Greenblatt's side will use his complaints as the basis to attack, or in this case, sideline people. Again, none of these three Muslim anchors have been kept off the air for saying anything anti-Semitic. In fact, they haven't said one syllable against Israel. They've gone to great lengths not to offend anyone. But that wasn't enough for Greenblatt. You know, Greenblatt claims that the ADL is not so much about anti-Semitism as it is against all forms of defamation in general. And it is true that they no longer call themselves the Jewish Anti-Defamation League, they just call themselves the ADL. But the problem is, whenever it comes time to talk about some act of anti-black violence, for some reason you'll occasionally have some cable network, typically MSNBC, bring Greenblatt on, and when he gets on the air, he'll give one throwaway mention to whatever racial attack happened, and then he will immediately pivot to talking about anti-Semitism, and he'll stay on that. However, whenever there's some anti-Semitic incident that goes down, the white media will often have a black commentator on, and their job is to say, we're against anti-Semitism, and it always stops there. It never pivots to the black community, though many of them will say, well, you got to say something about Farrakhan. That's what will happen. Whether it's Mark Levin, Richard Herrnstein, Sarah Silverman, or Bill Maher, you have never seen Jonathan Greenblatt condemning any Jewish person who engages in anti-black racism. But whenever it comes to anti-Semitism, he'll be the first one saying somebody should be taken off the air because they're not condemning it. That's the game that he plays. Far as he's concerned, sympathy only goes one way. But with Mehdi Hasan, Ali Velshi, and Ayman Moyeldin, they've been put on ice the last several days. And it's only been the last couple of days that the online media has made an issue of it to the point that MSNBC has been forced to say something, and their excuse is, oh, well, these guys haven't been sidelined, it's just that we've had them in different roles for logistical reasons, that's why you haven't seen them on air. The rumor is that Mehdi Hasan is supposed to be on Joy Reid's show sometime in the future, though nobody's exactly sure when. When these guys are back on the air, though, don't expect them to be causing any trouble. Well, maybe Ali Velshi will, but not Mehdi Hasan. This is the best job he's ever had or will ever have in his entire life, and he's not going to ruin that. You ought to see the letters that he was writing to some of Rupert Murdoch's newspapers back in the day when he was trying to get himself a working gig in Britain. And as for Ayman, well, he's the definition of bland. So no matter what these guys think of their unofficial suspension, they're not going to be making a big deal about it. Now, the issue comes in that you have a lot of immigrants who come to the U.S. and they jump on the bashing black people bandwagon. And as everyone knows, since at least the 19th century, that's the fastest way to get a pat on the head from white power and get them to tell you that you're on the team. Everyone can try to make false comparisons between themselves and the history of black Americans, but it won't wash. That's the reason why we're not taking any sides in this latest Middle Eastern conflict. Please don't think that this latest dust-up is going to result in a change in how either of those communities interact with us. Asians have already forgotten about how things were in 2020 already. Everyone wants to come to us and stand in solidarity, but only when white power's got its foot up their behinds. Other than that, it's back to business as usual. So the three Muslim anchors on MSNBC have gotten their wake-up call, but we all know they'll hit the snooze button soon enough. The lesson never sticks. But this is precisely why we're not taking any sides, because it doesn't make a difference how we're treated by these groups. We don't have a comfortable place under white supremacy, and even if we did, we wouldn't want it. Too many people practice opportunism as a group, and black people have been naive about that. The Arab news outlets haven't been making a big deal about how MSNBC's been treating its Muslim talent, mostly because they've been covering the hospital bombing in Gaza that killed hundreds of people. But they've all been complaining about how blatantly lopsided the white media's coverage has been in the U.S. These white networks here have not let any Palestinians or Arabs on the air. If you're not with the Israeli government or towing the line for them, you're not going to get any airtime. They won't even bring any Palestinian people on so they can argue with them. A lot of people in the white media identify as Jewish, and a lot of people in the white media also identify as Arab. But regardless of religious affiliation or ethnic background, both of them identify as white. And when it comes to how they've interacted with black people, the similarities far outweigh the differences. In fact, that becomes a type of common ground that they're all easily able to find. What does it mean to be American? It means to agree to and uphold the racial pecking order. Attack black people, mistreat black people, and you will have shown your loyalty to the system, and that establishes your American bona fides. I make note of MSNBC singling out its Muslim anchors because people need to understand that trashing black people and engaging in anti-black racism and discrimination doesn't mean you're on the team. It means you've made yourself a useful idiot. That's why I bring up the piece about Obadallah. Look how long it took this man to admit to what was right in front of him. When are people going to learn? The only safe place under white supremacy is fighting it. Bootlicking is a career path that doesn't come with a retirement plan. You want to be white supremacist adjacent? You can do that, but you also better be ready to eat a lot of crap and swallow your dignity too. Part of the devil's bargain is you have to come in for some abuse on a regular basis. See, these Arab American celebrities may be caught off guard by how they're being treated, but they shouldn't be. White supremacists love a cruel prank, especially one that takes a long time to pay off. They get a sick thrill out of breaking people's spirits, which is why they enjoy pretending to be someone's friend for a long time, only to then suddenly pull the rug right out from under them and see the look on their faces when they realize they've been played for a fool and that they had spent months, if not years, living a lie. It makes them feel as if their entire life has been nothing more than a fraud, just one cruel joke. See, these white supremacists love shattering someone's entire world. It's simultaneously a show of their power and a guilty pleasure for them. Will MSNBC own up to what they've done in this case? Frankly, I don't even think that it matters. Will their Muslim anchors speak out on this? If they haven't already, I wouldn't hold my breath. The only one that I could see quitting live on air is Ali Velshi, and I'm not betting on that one. White powers rewarded them too much for them to leave, at least abruptly. Sure, maybe many years from now they'll come clean about it and they'll give a couple of half-hearted misgivings. But today is what counts. And today, mum's the word. So don't expect this incident to have any lasting impact on them. They'll know what's up, but it won't mean anything. After all, at the end of the day, there's a lot more Arabs who think the way Dean Obadallah used to than those who don't. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Black Voltron Reloaded, Rod's Money, Ikegas Dorset, Antonio Daniels, and Abram Pruitt. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.